Welcome to The Art of Happiness. I'm Arthur Brooks. Well, friends, it's graduation season again, but it's the weirdest graduation season in our lifetimes, that's for sure. I just recorded a commencement address. It's a commencement address I would have loved to have given in person at a college in New York. But of course, the commencement address was canceled because the graduation ceremony was canceled because of the coronavirus epidemic. Virtually all, as far as I know, of the commencement addresses and graduation ceremonies across the country and around the world have been canceled, at least in person. And they've gone online or they've gone on video. So last Saturday morning, I put on a suit for the first time in a few months. And I set up my wife's iPhone 11 in my office and I hit record. I recorded a commencement address and then I uploaded it to my laptop and sent it off. It was concatenated with the rest of the commencement ceremony, and I hope it was useful to the graduates. It was pretty weird not being able to see their faces, pretty weird to not gauge any reaction after having worked on the address. A little bit closer to home, my oldest son just graduated from Princeton University, and he worked so hard. I'm so proud of him. You know, he was looking forward to his graduation. I mean, he probably wouldn't admit it, but I think he actually wanted to throw his cap up in the air and celebrate with his friends because it's a big event and you're with your friends. It's a festive environment. It's very disappointing. Now, we've talked in past episodes about how we deal with disappointment for sure, but it's always worth in these situations thinking about what's really important. Now, what's really important in graduation is the word commencement. Everybody listening knows that the word commencement means beginning. That's why graduation is so exciting. It's the beginning of something new, something important, something with purpose, something with meaning. Most people graduating today or this month, they're looking forward to a new career that they're going to start full of purpose and meaning, a calling, as it were. And this is not limited, of course, to graduates. Most people listening to me, they want a calling in their work as well, whether they get paid for their work or not. They want something that's laden with purpose, inherent meaning. How do you find it? Some people seem to have it naturally. Others struggle for years and years and years. What's the difference? Well, if you're wondering those things, this episode is for you because I've got the data. I've got the studies, and I'm going to share them with you in this episode of The Art of Happiness. We're going to do two things in this episode. I'm going to start with the latest research on finding purpose and meaning in work. And honestly, the reason I gathered all this is because I've been going through a commencement myself for the last couple of years. Regular listeners to this podcast know that for a long time, for 11 years, I was the president of the American Enterprise Institute, a think tank in Washington, D.C., an institution I love and a job I just loved. But it was time to finish. So at 55, I resigned. And I went back to academia. Now I'm a professor at Harvard. It was a commencement where I hoped that the next phase of my career really would be a calling. It would be a new kind of meaning, a new kind of purpose in my work. So with this research I'm going to talk to you about from people all over the world, it's intensely personal for me. And I bet it is for a lot of you too. I've taken about 1,000 studies in various forms, and I've tried to kind of mold them into four basic buckets. And what I'm going to do is give you what I think are the four big lessons on how your work can have more meaning. That's the first part of the episode. The second part of the episode I'm really excited about because it's with Jennifer Aaker. Jennifer Aaker is a professor of marketing at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. What a versatile, incredibly interesting researcher she is. She's done work on purpose and meaning with respect to careers, and we're going to talk about that. That's why I invited her, but she's so much more than that. She talks about happiness and fun, and she talks about humor and how it affects people's subjective well-being. She even talks about finding purpose and meaning in your own death, and yeah, we go there. So I can't wait to present that to you too. So stay tuned because we got a lot to do on this episode of The Art of Happiness. Enjoy. Imagine, if you will, that you're 4 years old. Your parents sign you up for a psychology experiment. You go to a laboratory and a really kindly man in a white coat comes out and sits in front of you at a table. You're on opposite sides of the table from each other. He takes out a bag of marshmallows. You love marshmallows. Of course you do. They're delicious. I still love them. He takes out a marshmallow and puts it in front of you on the table. He says, you want it? You're like, of course I want it. Love marshmallows. He says, you can have it. But first I have to go out for a second. I have to make a phone call. If I come back and that marshmallow is still there, I'm going to give you a second marshmallow. But if you eat it while I'm gone, that's all you get. Then he steps out of the room. He's gone for like 15 minutes, which is a really long time for a kid. Could you have waited? Well, that's a real experiment. It turns out a lot of you listening, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's the famous, of course, marshmallow experiment, which was conducted for the first time in 1970 and again in 1972 by Walter Mischel, who was a famous social psychologist at Stanford University. What was he trying to figure out? How many kids had the willpower at a very young age to not eat the marshmallow? And by the way, some kids don't like marshmallows, and he gave them a choice: marshmallows, animal crackers, pretzels, whatever they like best. What did he find? About 2/3 of the kids gobbled up the marshmallow. They couldn't wait 15 minutes. If you Google this, there's hilarious pictures on the internet of kids in the experiment who are just in agony trying to not eat the marshmallow because they want to get the second one. And finally, it's like, forget it, and they gobble it up. What would you have done? Could you have waited? Probably you could. If you're listening to a podcast on social science, the art of happiness, you're the kind of person that likes to invest in yourself, which is to say that you're the kind of person who has willpower, that can wait. Is that good for you? Walter Mischel thought so. He followed up a couple of decades later with the kids who had been in the experiment, now in their mid-20s. And what did he find? The ones who waited had better lives. They had better relationships. They did better in school. They had higher SAT scores. When they came out of college, assuming they went to college, and those who waited were more likely to go to college, they got better jobs. They made more money. Now, of course, we know that it's not all willpower, and follow-up studies showed that, in point of fact, it had a lot to do with socioeconomic circumstances, background. But the point remained: good things come to those who wait. That's probably you. I bet virtually everybody listening to this podcast, you would have waited. You would have gotten that second marshmallow. Probably a lot of you listening, you went to college or you did something similar where you worked really hard so that you could have a career, you could have a life that was really good, where your rewards were ample and abundant. But here's the question, not whether you could wait for the marshmallow. Here's my question. What's your marshmallow? Did you ever stop to think in your life when you were in college or in school or in training or whatever you did to get the best possible career, what you were doing it for? What's the best marshmallow of a career? What's the best calling? You know, this is the graduation special podcast, The Art of Happiness, this episode. So let's talk about that. How do you get the best possible marshmallow? How do you find your calling? I'm going to give you 4 rules. And if you're interested in this is based on my column, How to Build a Life, in The Atlantic from May 21st. So go look it up. Don't bother taking notes now. If you're really interested in this, you'll find all this written down. Just enjoy it. Here are the 4 rules for finding your true marshmallow. Number 1, your work has to be your reward. The biggest mistake that I see when I talk to people who are unhappy especially when they're unhappy in midlife, is that they didn't like their work, but they were waiting for something better. For years they wait, years they struggle. It's basically like one long series of marshmallow tests, but there's no marshmallow at the end. Look, as the old Buddhist saying goes, the key to the treasure is the treasure. The journey is the destination. That sounds sort of metaphysical, like what is the sound of one hand clapping? But it really makes sense. Look, if you don't enjoy the journey, you shouldn't go. Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about this, and the great American transcendentalist. He said that we always think that if we get to Florence, if we get to Rome, then we'll finally be happy. And we struggle through the trip and don't enjoy the traveling. And yet that's pretty much the trip itself, is the traveling per se. A lot of people don't pay attention to this until it's basically too late. And a lot of psychologists think that this is the basis for the bigger part of midlife crises, as people get to their midlife and say, I didn't like what I was doing, and now I see that there wasn't any great reward at the end. I'm just getting older, and at some point I'm going to die. So how do you make the journey the destination? How do you make the reward the work? How do you make the work into the reward? There are two easy ways to summarize this. And of course, it's easy to summarize it. It's harder to do it. But bear with me. To make the work the reward, you need to look for work, not that's fun, not that's hilarious every single day, not where you don't have any suffering. More on this when I talk to Jennifer Ocker in the second part of the episode. You're going to learn that if you're looking for a lack of suffering, you're doing the wrong thing. You need to look for two things in work that will be its own reward. You need to feel like you can earn your success, where there's accomplishment, where you're rewarded for creating value in your work, earning your success, and you have to feel like you're serving others. Your work has meaning in serving your fellow sisters and brothers. If you can earn your success and serve others, your work will be a reward. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two, for finding your marshmallow. Interesting work is more important than fun work. It's a really nice study that we'll put in the show notes. A group of German and American researchers, they fielded something called the Work Passion Pursuit Questionnaire. They looked at about 1,400 survey respondents and asked them about their jobs, whether they got a lot of enjoyment from their job or got a lot of meaning from their job and what they were looking for. And what they found was that people who found that there was meaning in their work, they felt that they had more of a calling, that they were happier in their jobs, they stayed longer in their jobs, they quit less, they complained less than people who simply had a lot of fun. You know, if your graduation speaker said, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life, and you thought that meant go have fun, you're wrong. That's not the secret. Now, of course, the devil's in the details once again. How do you do it? And here's where it's actually something that it's quite manageable. Look for the work that is most interesting to you. Now, why? Because interesting is both fun and meaningful. Interest is, believe it or not, according to most psychologists and brain scientists, a primary positive emotion, which is to say it's involuntary. It's intensely pleasurable, along with joy and love. Interest, joy, and love. When you have something that's interesting to you, it's so pleasurable. It's indescribable, isn't it? It's just great. It's wonderful. It's wonderfully fun to be interested. But if you're not passionate about something, you can't keep interest. In other words, if it's not meaningful, you can't maintain interest. Find something that's interesting to you over the long haul. That will be both fun and meaningful. That's lesson two. Lesson three, don't worry about going in a straight line. It's super old school to say you got to find a career where you can achieve and move forward and everything should build on the last thing. That's anachronistic. That's not modern at all. There are researchers at University of Southern California that look at the different kinds of careers, and they find that basically there's 4 types of careers. The first is called the steady state, where you have one job and you just get better at that one job. You go in and at the entry level and you become a master at it. The second is called the linear job, where you change jobs, but everything builds on the last thing in a straight line. Bigger, better, stronger, faster, promotions, money, etc. The third is called transitory, where you kind of jump around like a flock of starlings. Why did they go there? I don't know. This is, by the way, what your parents are most afraid of. You can have a transitory career that doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason. It might just be following your interests. The last is the spiral career, where one thing leads to something else, even though you have basically a series of mini careers. That's me, by the way. I started off for 12 years as a professional musician. I dropped out of college at 19. Some would say I got kicked out. It's debatable. And I went on the road, and for 12 years, I was a professional French horn player. I played in a symphony, played chamber music. I played a little bit of jazz. I played in a symphony orchestra in Barcelona. I taught at a conservatory. I did that until I was 31. At that point, I finished my education, and I didn't even have my bachelor's degree until about that age. And then I went on and finished my PhD and became an academic. And I did that for 10 years. And then I ran a research company, a think tank in Washington, D.C. for 11 years. And now I'm writing and speaking and doing podcasting. And my career has spiraled more than a pass from Tom Brady. Here's my point. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. It doesn't have to be a straight line. You just got to figure out, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a steady state kind of person? Do something well, better, inherently satisfying. Do you want to have a linear career where one thing builds on another, right in a straight line? Do you want to jump around all over the place, or do you want to spiral around with a series of mini careers like me? You decide. That's about you, not about some divine truth. Now, finally, and this is the last lesson for finding your marshmallow, pay attention to your passions. Some people ask me, why did you leave music? The best thing ever, right? And music is the best thing ever. I left music at 31 because I had an unhealthy and obsessive passion about my career and about music itself. Very good research. Once again, we'll put the citation in the program notes for this podcast that talks about the difference between obsessive and harmonious passions. What are they? Harmonious passions are those in which you're made better and you're made happier by your passion for something. Obsessive passions are those where you really think about it a lot. You truly are passionate, but you're not happy. You're not happy when you're doing the activity. You're not happy when you're not doing the activity. And it doesn't make you a better person. Think about this like healthy and unhealthy relationships. Everybody listening to me has had an unhealthy romance or two in their lives. I hope not too many. The most unhealthy romances are based on obsessive passion. You fight a lot. You make each other worse. You bring out the worst in each other. You're unhappy when you're together and you're unhappy when you're apart. Harmonious passion is where you bring out the virtue in each other. You're joyful when you're together and you're okay when you're apart. Same thing is true with your work. You can be harmoniously passionate about your work or obsessively passionate about your work. I was obsessively passionate about music, and it was a problem. I felt lousy when I wasn't practicing because I wasn't good enough. And when I was playing, I felt like I wasn't living up to my own standard. It was never good enough. It's hard to leave. It was heartbreaking to leave, as a matter of fact. But when I did my doctorate and I started teaching and now speaking and writing and doing what I'm doing right now, I'm so happy because this is our harmonious passion. Find that. So my friends, here are your 4 lessons for finding your marshmallow. Make work your reward. Look for something that is deeply interesting to you. Don't worry about going in a straight line, and make sure that your passions are harmonious, not obsessive. So there you have it. There are your 4 lessons. Once again, you can go find that in my How to Build a Life column in the Atlantic from May 21st, and you'll find some of the studies that I talked about in the show notes. I'm so excited to welcome Jennifer Acker to the podcast. Jennifer is somebody I've admired for a long time, but I've never had the opportunity to talk to. We work in the same field. We both call ourselves social scientists, which is this really old school way to talk about the study of social behavior. Usually people are more specialized. And so that's the first thing that I noticed. And I thought, wow, I have to talk to this person. But she also does work in subjective well-being in all kinds of interesting and creative areas, from death and dying to humor to fun to purpose and meaning. And this is just an opportunity for me to have a conversation I've wanted to have for a long time. Jennifer Acker is a professor of marketing at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. She's a psychologist, got her BA in psychology at UC Berkeley, and did her PhD in marketing also in psychology at Stanford. So delighted to talk to Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Arthur. How are you?
I'm great. And, we're actually looking at each other right now because in the era of coronavirus, we've all learned that these technologies where we can make eye contact stimulate oxytocin. And that's better than actually just hearing each other's voices, right?
That's right. I'm looking at you directly. Oxytocin flooding everywhere.
That's exactly right. Because when you don't make direct eye contact, there's almost no oxytocin. But when you make direct eye contact and you look right into the green dot, it floods into your brain, and it's intensely pleasurable. And I'm so happy to be talking to you today about your work. And I have a whole bunch of questions for you. So why don't we just jump right in? But actually, let me take one side detour. You're teaching 4 classes right now at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. That's a lot. And you're doing it all on Zoom. Is that right?
We are. In fact, I just talked to the CEO of Zoom, Eric Dwan, yesterday. And so the levels of irony, the levels of Zoomness in my life, interviewing the CEO of Zoom on Zoom, teaching real classes on Zoom, and also classes that were created to be online, on everything's on Zoom. So yes, that is true. We teach a new type of leader, the innovation playbook, and then these two sections of humor, serious business, which I'll share more about later.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you about that, because I've been looking forward to learning more about that. This is your newest work, I know. It's about how humor is, as you say, serious business. So we'll learn more about that. What are you doing in your coronavirus lockdown? Are you living in Palo Alto and in a kind of a lair, or did you go someplace else?
No, we're living near the school. I live very close to Berkeley. So it's been surprisingly, I don't want to say positive, but it's been surprisingly meaningful, right? We'll talk about that in a second, but it's true. Your needs go down partly because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
And then you understand better about what you really need, what's really important, what habits persisted before the global pandemic that were so important to you, which ones changed. And they often reveal how we might spend time in different ways once we move to the next phase of this, of Corona.
So you're experiencing personal growth in your coronavirus lockdown. Is that right?
Certainly, I would say greater self-awareness of what my needs and what my needs really are.
And that's great. Now, it's interesting, two people who specialize in studying subjective well-being asking each other about subjective well-being in the time of coronavirus. This is like this episode is becoming a self-licking ice cream cone. So let's go into the subject at hand. This is graduation season, and a lot of graduates are really disappointed. But there's the inherent meaning of graduation, the commencement, the beginning of something new, is so that people can start these lives of meaning and purpose. People are thinking about their careers, and people often ask me, as I know they do you, how can I find a calling? So that's where I want to start in your own work. You recently conducted a study, and that's the first thing I wanted to talk to you about, that found that people can find meaning and purpose in their lives, but they can also live unhappy lives at the same time. So I want to start by kind of netting out the difference between happiness and meaning.
So Arthur, good question. In one set of studies, my co-authors, who are Kathleen Voss, Roy Baumeister, and Emily Garbinski, ran a set of studies, and we asked people, to what degree do you believe you have a happy life? To what degree do you believe you have a meaningful life? Then what we did was we partialed out the positive covariance between those things. So a lot of people say that they have a happy and meaningful life, but not everyone. So what we wanted to do was explore those individuals that say they have a happy but not very meaningful life, versus a meaningful but not very happy life. And there's three basic differences between these two types of people. There's lots, but these are the three most important. Happiness is really about how you feel right now, and meaningfulness is much more lasting. Happiness is about getting, meaningfulness is about giving. And happiness is about feeling good and not feeling bad. Meaningfulness is about feeling good, but also recognizing that feeling bad or anxious or fearful is also part of life.
That's really interesting, particularly because a lot of people are being told on college campuses, back in the 60s, the Woodstock generation was told, if it feels good, do it. But it seems like on college campuses, we're hearing, if it feels bad, treat it. Now, if you want a meaningful life, maybe that's not the right advice, right?
Absolutely. I think that we're at a point in time, and the global pandemic, I think, has, raised a lot of issues about how much our culture, America in particular, prioritizes happiness. And it's kind of that short run happiness.
It's the pleasure, it's sort of the enjoyment, but it's not this long-term, and I've heard you talk about this before, by the way. So Aristotle talked about eudaimonia, which is a good life well lived. And that's very different than hedonia, from which we get hedonism, which is feeling good. So it's feeling good versus a good life well lived. This is kind of what you're distinguishing between, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people with, the coronavirus, having them, be in their homes with their family, not able to work, not able to socialize, are asking themselves, what makes me feel good? And what is a moment worth living? What is a day worth living? And what's really meaningful? And one of the most important things about meaning is that it is accompanied with negative experiences and hardships. Meaning comes from that. And so one of our papers, and this is a work with Kathleen Voss, as well as Ria Catapona, we show that comprehension, or what happens when we have negative experiences, we start to understand ourselves and our world in very different ways. Comprehension provides this feeling of coherence or a sense of understanding. And what's important is that meaning in life comes about when you comprehend things in very different ways. And it's a crucial process by which people can extract meaning from undesirable, negative, aversive experiences.
It's interesting, particularly for young people who are graduating today too, isn't it? I mean, they're going to go into careers, and a lot of them are being told, make sure that you find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But if they want meaning and purpose, they're going to work really hard and they're going to suffer, and that's good, right?
Absolutely. I think one thing that'll be really interesting is the students that are graduating right now are under such a context that's going to test resilience, test the sense of what really is meaningful, and it may redefine success for them. And success very well might be redefined as, to what degree are you improving as a person? And improving our personal growth comes from these negative experiences, understanding and learning, why they happened, what you learned from that negative experience, and how you'll change or grow afterwards.
Okay, so lesson number one that we're taking here from Jennifer Ocker for our graduates who are listening, and listen to the graduation special, is if you want purpose and meaning, if you want a real calling, don't be afraid of pain. Don't look for something where you will never get criticized. Don't look for something in which you'll never experience an adverse experience or an adverse set of circumstances. On the contrary, look for something that really is meaningful and do it with courage. Is that a fair summation?
Absolutely. And humor. I think courage and humor both are incredibly important. We, my husband and I, we take our kids, we have 3 kids, and we go on these family sabbaticals in order for them to be unhappy. Like, they don't want to go. They want to be with their friends. They want to be here. It's absolutely not about happiness, but we do it every year. We've done it for the last 5 years, and trying to move to these new destinations basically evokes pain. So we're layering pain into their childhood. But what's happened is, now that they've grown and they've really appreciated those experiences, because they tend to be the most meaningful ones. At the time, they were full of pain.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we're going to put in the show notes the papers that you're referring to. I've actually taught these papers in my class at the Harvard Business School in Leadership and Happiness. And simply because you show in your research that if you want something that you're going to remember, where you're going to find a moment of personal growth, the hinge points in your life, it's not all fun and games. You don't remember the things where you had the most enjoyment. You remember things that were meaningful because they were challenging. And that's what we need to be looking for. You want a life of meaning and a career full of purpose, get ready to suffer and be thankful for it. Crazy learning that from 2 happiness scholars, isn't it? But graduates, there you go. Now, I've got some more questions that follow along this, and I do want to get into a couple of things that you've already talked about. So the family sabbaticals and the humor, because this stuff is so cool that you're doing right now. But before we do that, tell me a bit about short-term versus long-term, and how meaningfulness and negative experiences, how they relate to the short-term and the long-term, because you've done work on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we make decisions with more of a short-term focus, so in context, we're really thinking about the day. What do you need to get done today? How am I feeling through the day? You end up, making decisions that are much more sort of akin to keeping, this idea of like, short-run happiness on the pedestal. You're optimizing for the short run happiness. A, did I get the things done today that I wanted to? B, did I feel good doing it? C, how do I feel at the end of the day? Do I need to have a cocktail? Do I need to have a pick me up? And then you're making these decisions based on what you hoped and expected and how you feel in the day. When you make longer term decisions that are optimized more for meaning, you're more likely to take maybe more of a bird's eye view of the day. You're more likely to look at a broader time perspective or temporal perspective, which links the past, the present, and the future. And in that way, you're more likely to be able to comprehend what's happening to you in the day with wisdom and a sense of equanimity. So when negative things do happen, there's a greater sense that you can comprehend the meaning of that negative experience in the context of, the week, the month, or your life.
And if your life is longer, according to this, you should be better equipped and have more experience in doing this. You once said that that happiness and meaning, they're a lot more correlated with old people than for young people. In other words, as you go throughout your life, meaningfulness and pleasure go together more than they do when you're younger. I suppose that has something to do with the fact that I've seen in my own research that older people, they experience adversarial circumstances just as much as younger people, but they don't hold on to bad feelings as long because they know that homeostatically that they're going to feel better soon and they get a head start on feeling better. They're like, tomorrow I'm not going to remember this, so I'm going to get a head start on not remembering this. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think there's a secondary reason too. I think that as one ages, we have some early research that's unpublished that basically tests this idea that older people, or as you age, you start to understand that if you have meaning, happiness follows.
Huh.
But if you have happiness, meaning doesn't always follow.
Wow. That's incredibly important, isn't it? Because what we're suggesting is that happiness could be a function of something that's spurred by unhappiness. And that's completely counterintuitive. I mean, we're evolved to avoid unhappiness and to evolve to avoid pain, aren't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really important. And if you think about the decisions we as individuals and as a country, or individuals that are working on artificial intelligence, which I know we might talk about a little bit later, oftentimes you're thinking about the utility function that we're all using to make decisions. And this idea of a frictionless, pain-free life is often guiding our decisions and the products that we make and the way that we live our lives.
So if it feels bad, treat it as wrong. And if it feels good, do it is also wrong in a lot of cases.
Yeah, that might be a little bit of, I think the right thing was, if it feels bad, understand it.
Yeah, okay.
Understand it. Seek to get a support system around you. And in those cases, keep trying to optimize for learning and growth, and being open to different tools that will help you through that.
Yeah. But and to be clear, I'm overstating the point when I say ignore the idea if it feels bad, treat it, because there are a lot of cases in which our systems are hyperactive and we can have clinical depression, or we can be suffering from high levels of anxiety, and treatment is really, really appropriate. But your point is, all discomfort is not bad, and we have to have the wisdom and the experience, and we have to think about it deeply enough to understand what's good discomfort and what becomes a pathology that we actually should seek treatment for. Is that right?
That's right.
You've actually shown in your research that happiness, or the perception of happiness, changes throughout our lives every 5 to 10 years. I didn't know that. And, I've been studying this stuff for a long time. You're blowing my mind. Tell me more about that.
So a lot of this work was started with Sepp Kamvar and Cassie McGillner. And in our early work, we drew on Sepp and Jonathan Harris's data set called We Feel Fine. And what Sepp and Jonathan did was they wrote an algorithm that combed the blogosphere for all mentions of I feel and I am feeling. So over 3 years, they collected 12 million data points of what people feel and when they're feeling it, et cetera. And because blog-based data has ages associated with it, you can scrape the age data and figure out what people are feeling at what age. And then what correlates with, for example, I feel happy and excited because I'm graduating, or I feel happy and calm, tonight I had a great day, whatever. So what they were able to do in that first data set of 12 million data points is be able to see what people say when they feel happy. And what happens is when you're 11 to 14-year-olds, basically there's nothing after the sentence, I feel. I don't know. Arthur, do you have kids?
Yeah, I have 3 just like you, but they're 22, 20, and 17.
Okay, do you remember when they were 11?
Yeah, I've tried to blot it out, but yeah, I more or less, yeah.
So when you said, how do you feel? They probably said, huh?
Yeah,
what?
they don't know, especially the boys, by the way. You can say, what is in what period, Triassic, Jurassic, or, something, what was the something Osor? And they can completely tell you, but you say, are you sad? They'll look at you as if you'd ask them something about, particle physics that they've studied before. It's completely beyond their comprehension.
My boys just turned 18 and we only got to a new place. We were stuck in that place for a long time. I love you, Cooper and Devin, if you're listening, I love you. Anyway, the emotional sophistication of these young kids, certainly boys, tends to be not overly involved. But by the time they get to 18, 19, they actually feel a great degree of anxiety. And when they feel happy, it's synonymous with excitement. Which is a very angsty form of happiness.
Right.
And then you move to like mid-20s and the meaning of happiness is associated with conquering the world. Like now I found my goals. Now I have a feeling that money, power, or status is within my grasp.
Right.
And so the meaning of happiness is more about feeling kind of proud or, satisfied about your progress. Then you move to your 30s and the meaning of happiness correlates with feeling aligned and balanced. Like you are healthy and your family is doing well. You're only as happy as your least happy child.
That's for sure. Yeah.
And then you move in your 40s and onward, you start to associate meaning of happiness with significance and impact. It's not about me. It's about the impact I've had on others. And then you move into feelings of contentment, where the meaning of happiness is I feel peaceful, I feel grateful, I feel calm and content. And these different phases really shift in these systematic ways every 5 or 10 years. What's really important, though, is that it's not just linear. Like we have experiments that show, so Arthur, let's say you're 50. We're going to assume you're around 50-ish. What we can do is for individuals who are 50-ish, we can actually have them undergo an intervention where you breathe in a certain way and you'll redefine happiness just like a teenager would. And similarly, we'll take 2 groups of 18-year-olds and then we'll give them an intervention. We'll give half of them the task to breathe deeply, focused on the present for 5 to 7 minutes versus not. And then we'll ask both groups, the ones that breathe normally versus breathe deeply, meditatively, what is the meaning of happiness for you? And the individuals in the meditative group are much more likely to say that the meaning of happiness is peaceful and contentment, just like a 50-year-old would. And they make very different decisions. Like we'll give them a choice of 2 types of teas, and we'll be in the lab. Do you want a peppermint refreshing tea or do you want a calming chamomile tea? And that the group that did the breathing exercise, they're much more likely to pick the chamomile tea than the refreshing peppermint tea. So it really, the meaning of happiness impacts the choices you make.
Is there something, how does this relate to Danny Blanchflower's U-shaped happiness curve stuff? So, people in their late teens expect to be happier than when they're 25, and then they find they're a little less happy, and they're even a little less happy when they're 35. And it starts to turn around. I turned 56 yesterday. And so according to Danny Blanchflower's data, I am like golden until my early 70s at this point, because it goes down and down and down, and then it bottoms out and starts to come back up again. How does the changing definition of happiness relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
And when I say happy birthday, I really just mean meaningful birthday. But I still hope you had cake. So the way that David's work sort of fits with our work is that you can look at happiness. You take this, he'll take the same types of metrics and look over ages, and he'll look at, countries and the relationship between well-being and age. What we do, and so he'll show that U-shaped
Right.
curve that you
And by the way,
described.
as a side note here, I just referred to Danny Blanchflower, and Jennifer called him David because he's actually David Blanchflower, who for some reason goes by Danny. So, and we will post the paper that we're talking about here to the show notes. Go on. Sorry.
Yes. And some of us are friends with him and some of us are not. So some of us will call him David.
We
Anyway,
live in the Northeast. We suffer through winter. So
that's right. But our work will look at the meaning of happiness. And so this idea of where he'll take a static measure of well-being and he'll look across ages and countries. What we do is we look at the meaning of happiness, so the correlates with happiness, what people say, defines their happiness. So you can still demonstrate the U-shaped curve,
right.
but the meaning of happiness will still shift. So you can still see, even if So anyway, you can still see the U-shaped curve in even our types of research, but the meaning and one of the reasons I think why happiness does start to increase on the back end is partly because happiness has been redefined as contentment and meaning and something that's beyond yourself.
That's interesting. My own research does a little different thing on this, and I haven't quite figured it out yet, but I don't look at the average happiness over age. I look at the variance in happiness over age. And I find that it goes up and up and up and up and up. And so in other words, older people on average are happier, but there's a big difference between the happy and the unhappy by the time they get into their 70s and 80s. There's a lot of really happy people, but a lot of really unhappy people too. You found that in your research too, haven't you?
Yes, I have seen that in our research. And a lot of the variance is due to health effects, how one's health is, physical health, especially as one ages.
That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And also probably the decisions and the development that people have gone through earlier in their lives. If they thought about some of the things that we're talking about having meaningful experiences and self-improvement and growth, my guess is that they're going to do better off when they're 70 than if they haven't, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So all the graduates, once again, the decisions you make today are again going to have an impact on the happiness you feel tomorrow. No pressure. Okay, I want to go on to a couple of other your newer work than all this because I just love it. And you've got a new book coming out on humor. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. So a little context. As you know, as an academic, we're often not really trained to prioritize humor. The job at hand is to, sort of fall in love and find ideas, to create hypotheses, to get large data sets, to test those hypotheses. And then once that hypothesis is solid, you produce papers. And that process is one that tends to be pretty deep. It tends to, you have to also prioritize efficiency as well as depth of thought. There's certainly not any prioritization of levity or humor that comes with the actual process of research.
That's for sure. Yeah.
And it's not even clear that that's important, in teaching.
Right.
When you're teaching important things, this idea of being trained to actually use a joke or use some levity or even laugh, that's not something that would ever kind of, infiltrate our world in any systematic way. So it was really surprising to me about 4 years ago or 5 years ago when in a set of more personal experiences, I found that the power of humor when others used it not only made the process of what they're doing more enjoyable and how they were interacting with certain networks and friends, family, etc. But I started to observe, at least anecdotally, that they were more effective at achieving goals that they wanted. For example, about 7 years ago, my husband and I we kind of took on this task to try and find 100,000 people in the bone marrow registry in honor of essentially a friend that had passed on. And in so doing, we worked with 17 different families who were trying to save the life of their daughter, son, parent. And what we witnessed when we were going through this with them is that those families and individuals that had humor and levity, and they took that into the process of trying to get more people in the bone marrow registry, or even taking chemo, or doing a bone marrow transfer. Those were the individuals, at least anecdotally, that seemed to be most effective.
Mm.
And that's what started getting me interested in understanding the science of humor.
And you have a new book coming out on this, right?
We do. It's called Humor Seriously. It's written with Naomi Bagdonas, and it's out in October. But it's been just a joy. We really focused on this idea that humor is a secret weapon in both business and in life. And then we bring to bear a lot of behavioral research that proves out the types of goals that are achievable when you use humor and levity to counterbalance the gravity of the situation or the seriousness of what you're doing. And we find that the balance of gravity and levity gives power to both.
It's harder for some people than others, right? I mean, you're naturally an ebullient person, obviously. I mean, you're funny. It's easy for you. But for some people, it's not so easy, right?
Well, first of all, thank you. Second of all, just want to acknowledge that.
No, thank you. Thank you for the acknowledgement.
You are welcome. The second thing I would say is that, I wasn't actually always this way. And I would say that a lot of my shift in perspective and how I do research and how I teach, and even how I'm a mother, how I show up as a mother, a lot of that has changed in the last 3 or 4 years. Because Arthur, I progress. I improve over time. But part of it is just seeing the data on the power of when you want to do serious things, or you have significant ambition to make a positive impact in the world. Just seeing the data about how powerful using humor or levity, or even just being easy to laugh is, it's really that shifted the way that I interact, the way I teach, and the way I even do research.
Now, it's funny. I mean, in academia, there's kind of a grimness that I think that we're all suffering through right now. Everybody's sort of afraid to make jokes. Part of it is because you don't want to be inappropriate. And so there's a risk aversion, and joking and humor are inherently risky. I mean, so you look at the social science on joking. 85% of laughter is basically social lubrication, where you're laughing with somebody even though there's something that's not technically funny. The other 15% is in response, more or less, give or take, to jokes. But jokes require something unexpected, and something unexpected has to push a boundary. How do you know where the boundary is? How do you use jokes to get ahead in life and not get fired?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So some of our co-authors, Brad Bitterly, Maurice Schweitzer, Mike Norton, Allison Woods Brooks, they've just done a remarkable job at starting to unpack those very questions. One of my favorite studies that Brad actually led was, and this was in his dissertation, he showed that individuals that use humor appropriately, and I'll get to that in a second, enjoy greater perceptions of status, confidence, and competence in their workforce. What's also interesting is that as long as the joke or the humor is not inappropriate, right. You still enjoy increased perceptions of confidence and competence. And what's interesting here is that we have such a sort of such a low bar in humor in business for the reasons you just stated, that oftentimes we won't even try. But as long as, again, it's not inappropriate, it actually, you really enjoy benefits from it. So that said, there are things we're in a moment in time where what is appropriate and what is inappropriate is certainly shifting. And so an awareness of how to read the room, an awareness of the goals you have in a meeting, an awareness of your status relative to other people's status, all of these things really matter. And what we find in our class and our research and others do as well is that when you use certain tools such as self-deprecating humor, that you're often buffered from the downside that could happen when you use humor or levity in the workforce, especially an important tool as you increase in status.
That's really interesting. The two of the authors that you mentioned, I'll put in a quick plug for. Mike Norton and Allison Woods Brooks are my colleagues at the Harvard Business School. We will, once again, we'll put references to this in the show notes because it's really worth people looking at this. I became aware of your work on this because I can't remember, I saw one of your syllabi or something. And I noticed that you were doing work. And so I started reading into it, reading up on it. It's so interesting and it's so good. I want to go on to this other area that you're doing a lot of work on. And I know that you're helping companies with. You live out in Silicon Valley. So we know what people do out there. Increasingly, they do that here in Boston, which is the other hotspot for tech and biotech in particular. You're doing work on artificial intelligence and subjective well-being. That just sounds like, what? I mean, it's almost incompatible, right? But they're not. Tell me more.
Yes, we have a class called Designing AI for Human Well-Being. And this is a class that's taught with Fei Li in the engineering school and, and me in the business school as well. And what we found is that this idea of understanding how is artificial intelligence developing, what are we optimizing for, who is developing it, those types of questions are important to ask right now, especially for students that we're training, because the types of people that are developing our machine learning tools and algorithms are oftentimes not representative of, the global population. We're often optimizing for things that that companies may want, to click on this link, and then you might be able to go to a product or a website and you'll be able to, purchase something. And we haven't done a good enough job of understanding the negative unintended consequences of what we're programming, and B, what do we really want as for humanity to be programming for? So to design AI that augments us, we need to really know what makes our lives meaningful, not just what drives short-run happiness, and what we want our AI-enhanced future to look like. So for these last 2 years, we found that first, the number one reason why the students take our class isn't to learn the technical aspects of machine learning, but to understand human well-being, your work.
Right.
And the way to think about this, I think, is to program a self-driving car, we need to solve the trolley problem. But to program friendly AI or a superintelligence whose goals are aligned with us, we need to understand the meaning of life. And so we create this class. So we tackle these questions. What is meaning? What is life? What is meaning in life? And in the age of COVID, these questions are more salient than ever. Both because of the current circumstances, but also because of how our future of work and life will change.
So I've worked a lot with engineers and technologists and futurists and people in the social media industry. And it's a real paradox in the world of people, particularly in social media, that they got into the business and they created these platforms because they wanted to connect people. And if you connect people, they're going to be happier. And they're finding out that people aren't happier, that they're binging on social media. And as you and I both know, Jean Twenge down at San Diego State University, she's finding that more than an hour a day of all social media platforms combined, you get lonelier. It's sort of social junk food where, you eat more and more and more and it's bad for your body, but you actually continue to be hungry because there's no nutrients, there's no oxytocin, there's no inherent contact. So what's the advice that you would give to somebody who's creating a new social media platform based on your AI research on how it can be life enhancing as opposed to detrimental to subjective well-being?
I think it's such an important question. I think her work is so important, especially right now, even just personally having 3 teenagers in our house, and seeing theirs and ours are the patterns of behavior of how connected we are digitally and what does that do to individuals in our physical presence. I think that one of the things that we talk a lot about is after we, point out that the current use of AI and technology more generally has been engineered, not necessarily maliciously, but to give us instant gratification and decrease friction. It's about eliminating these pain points and optimizing for convenience. And so this
Right.
result is this clickbait rather than substance. And so and even like, for example, well, anyway, what I was going to say was, it, in our family, we also talk about, how susceptible humans are to this short-term design and what has led to breaking democracy, partly because we're more in these sort of siloed systems where reinforcement learning algorithms are persisting and making sometimes our world smaller. What we talk about in the class is these new types of platforms or new ways of even thinking about algorithms. So for example, you mentioned loneliness in Jean's work. One of our teams just finished a project where just showing how AI can decrease feelings of loneliness, and using this target population of international students who are particularly susceptible to loneliness. They, developed an AI-powered chatbot to alleviate feelings of marginalization, which isn't necessarily new or novel, but how they were optimizing the algorithm, the platform they were using was really extraordinary. There was another team who actually developed a concept for AI-assisted tools to treat opioid addiction, and they focused on veterans who are, particularly at risk, and they created this holistic solution that use technology to build out support networks and track milestones. So this idea of improvement as being the metric of success was really interesting there.
So are you encouraged? Do you think that the future's bright it's almost as if we made a big societal gamble or bargain 30 years ago, that if we basically handed the keys over to engineers and government officials, that 1,000 flowers would bloom. And yet, you and I look at the subjective well-being data, on almost every source, and we find that people are getting less happy. We're spending more. We're doing the things that people told us to do. We're getting the platforms. We're funding the government. We're doing this. Something's going wrong. Do you think that we can turn that around by actually using these tools, say of artificial intelligence and engineering-based solutions? Do you think that we can become happier?
I am an optimistic person in nature, but I am concerned. I am concerned. I think we need to take fast, thoughtful, and sort of swift action at understanding what is being built out now, what are we optimizing for, what are the values that are inherently being built into these algorithms, and what do we want as human beings. So I can't say honestly that I don't know if I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I guess I'll say I'm hopeful.
Yeah, no, hopeful means that there's something can be done and we can do it. Optimistic, we don't know how the world's going to turn out. We don't know how any of these things are going to turn out for sure. I have one more question for you, because you said something that was really provocative and I want to learn more. And I want to learn more for personal reasons. How do I do a family sabbatical?
Okay, so this is what you do. You take your kids, doesn't matter how old they are. You can do it anytime. They're going to hate it no matter what. You grab them.
Do you say this up front? You say, hey, kids, you're going to hate this.
Yeah, or when they say, that does not sound like a good idea, you say, I know. And it's because it's a bad idea that we're going to do this. You really got to lower the expectation. So that's the key first step. Second, you find a destination that you want to go to. You lower your expectations of how, good the experience is going to be. You have to stay for at minimum 4 to 5 weeks. And then as long as you get over 4 weeks, then you can kind of mentally round it up to 2 months, which is basically a same thing as a move. Now, remember, my definition of a move is not the same as everyone else's. And then third, you got to make new friends. You can't take friends with you. You have to make new friends. Ideally you have to move and go to school there, or at least take a job there, or do something that's not vacation like. And then you got to create these new experiences. We went to New York the first time for 6 months. Then we went to Sweden and Stockholm, in Stockholm, and then we went to Sydney and went to Berlin, and then we went back to New York. And each of these things, which ranged from about 2 months to 6 months, we as a family took new risks and had to make new friends, and had to had to basically immerse ourselves in these new experiences. And that's basically the definition of a family sabbatical.
That's interesting, and it's completely consistent with your work on meaning and purpose as opposed to happiness. So there's no instant gratification that comes from this. On the contrary, you're actually looking for a way to be uncomfortable so that you can stimulate personal growth. This is the grit of sand inside the oyster making the pearl. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the thing that's the most important, Arthur, so this is the other thing you got to keep in mind. And this one you don't have to design for, it just happens. You end up laughing the entire time because it's so bad that you as a family laugh. And there's studies that show when you have shared laughter that the relationship just flourishes. So think about the time that you laughed last with one of your kids. There was a shared laughter, like belly laughter. Those are the memories that really not only are definitional, but actually change the nature of the relationship. So you get this new set of norms as a family. Humor actually ends up defining it much more than when you're at home, when everyone has their thing to do. And we underscore it by, I actually write these family sabbatical newsletters. I will send you one. I will send anyone one that would like one.
I would love that. Absolutely.
Podcast. And we turn out holiday cards that actually capture it, and they capture the miserableness of the family sabbatical, but it makes the reader laugh, feel better about their life. And we're laughing with them because we're not taking ourselves too seriously.
That's fantastic. And there's as we close, there's a meta philosophy, Jennifer Aaker's meta philosophy of the best life, as I'm I've ascertained it in your work, but I'm really getting in this conversation. Don't look for the trivial. Don't look for the immediate. Go big. Be ambitious with your own purpose, with your own significance, with your own ability to serve others, to earn your success, to be fully alive. This is this ancient theology. Saint Irenaeus, this 4th century Catholic saint, said the glory of God is a person fully alive. And so Jennifer Aaker's prescription for being fully alive is to shy away from the trivialities, the instant clicks, and to go for the things that actually might hurt, that might inflect your happiness, but only vis-a-vis the discomfort and even the unhappiness that comes from life. Laugh more, but laugh genuinely at the things that actually deserve laughter, and share that with others. Laugh abundantly and love as such. And then AI, this is a recommendation for the people who are listening to us who are in these particular industries. Just as you should not waste your life by going for the trivial click, don't create products that give people the opportunity to go for trivial clicks. Use the technology to the good, such that meaning and purpose and significance can be attained. It's in our hands. Now, that we return once more to the big takeaway for our graduates who are listening to us today, graduation special after all. If you are in trouble, seek help. But just because there's trouble doesn't mean something's wrong. It's important for us to remember that pain is not something to be feared, that discomfort is not something to be avoided, that to be fully alive is to feel the life in life. And therein lies one of the great secrets to a life with the most purpose and meaning. Jennifer Aaker, what a joy it's been to be with you. How I've admired your work, and now all the more so because I get to know you personally. We've only looked at each other across Zoom, but I'm looking forward to seeing you in person one of these days.
Me as well. Thank you so much, Arthur.
Thank you for your work. And to all of us listening, that was Jennifer Aaker. Please look in the show notes. You'll get a big dose of what she's doing in the academic sphere. And humor, seriously, the next book that's coming out in October. I'm going to come back to it because once it comes out, I'm going to be talking an awful lot about it, but you're going to want to get it. So why not order it early on Amazon so you get your copy on the very first day? Thanks, Jennifer. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of The Art of Happiness. I hope you've enjoyed it. I really have. Our producers for The Art of Happiness are Scott Emmergut and Cece Gallagly. I want to thank all of you for being part of this. I feel like we're co-creating this together. I'm hearing from a lot of you. Please do reach out. You can reach out and find contacts for me and for Cece and for Scott in the information for this show. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you'd like to hear more of. If you like it, please do subscribe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. Also, and most importantly, if you think somebody could be enriched by this podcast, please recommend it. Think about 5 people who need to be happier. Tell them to go listen to The Art of Happiness, that they will actually get some serious tips on how to live a life that's better, that's happier, and where they can lift up other people as well. So with that, my friends, stay happy, stay healthy, and see you next time on The Art of Happiness. I'm Arthur Brooks.
Ricochet. Join the conversation.